Hello, stupid babies. This video can be separated into two main segments. The first is a brief tutorial on how I personally go about filming my CRT screen, and the second is a more extended and artsy explanation on why I do so for all of my videos. If you'd like to skip around parts of this video, you can use the chapter feature, or check the description for timestamps. Let's start with the how. Here it is in a sentence. Blur the pixels, control your shutter, and mind the artifacts. Now let me elaborate. Camera. I personally use the Panasonic Lumix G7, whatever it's called. It's a consumer grade DSLR. There's nothing super special about this camera, I just figured I'd clarify for those who are interested. Most any camera you can get your hands on should work for filming or photographing a CRT screen. What's important is that you need to use a camera that grants you manual control of its settings. I'm talking things like aperture, ISO, shutter speed, and focus. If you're looking for a DSLR and want to capture video, make sure it allows for manual control of video, because many offer manual photo but only have automatic video. If you can't get your hands on a dedicated camera or camcorder, you can use your phone, but you'll probably have to purchase an app like Filmic Pro to give you access to its manual settings. And yes, I know it's very stupid that manual isn't offered in the default camera app, but it is what it is. If you don't already know what all of these settings mean and would like to, I'd suggest you source that information elsewhere, because this video isn't about teaching camera fundamentals. I will quickly and terribly explain the two settings that are most important to think about when filming a CRT: focus and shutter speed. You're probably already familiar with focus. Stuff that's in focus is sharp and easy to make out, and stuff that's out of focus is blurry and hard to make out. If you have manual control over your focus, you can change the distance from the camera at which the central point of focus rests. You can place it close to the lens or far from it. When I film a CRT, I always try to keep the pixels slightly blurred because that's what looks most accurate to real-life vision. If you focus directly on the pixels, it looks unnatural because the camera interprets things too literally. It's perceiving the small bits of black space between the pixels, which I think makes the image look dull. And the pixels are so big that if you place the camera close enough to the screen, it can actually see on a sub-pixel layer, meaning you can see the individual strips of red, green, and blue that color a pixel. Which, I'll admit, can sometimes look cool in its own right, but it takes away from the image that's actually being displayed on screen most of the time. It's too visually busy. Kind of ironic, right? You have to take the focus off the pixels to properly see the image they're trying to convey. I think that's irony anyways. The survey's still out on what that word actually means. The other big setting is shutter speed, which is a bit more complicated to explain. It basically determines how long the sensor of a camera is exposed to light during a photograph, which both relates to how bright the resulting image is and how much motion blur is imprinted on it. All you really need to know when it comes to filming screens is that the camera's shutter tends to conflict with the way CRTs draw images. Basically, they draw the image in rows of pixels from top to bottom of the screen really fast, 60 times a second to be precise. The shutter on a camera also tends to expose the image from top to bottom, so when the screen and the shutter fall out of sync, it creates this scrolling artifact. Now, admittedly, I haven't found a foolproof way of completely and consistently preventing this artifact from appearing, and you can see examples of it in all my videos. Sometimes you just happen to roll the camera and have the two sync perfectly and you don't get the artifact, but most of the time, the best we can do is just work around it or embrace it. Changing the shutter speed changes the appearance of the artifact. Faster speeds tend to make it darker, while slower speeds tend to make it brighter. I usually like to keep it at about a 50th or a 60th of a second, because those are the settings that make it the least intrusive. These speeds are usually about what you want to have your camera set to for filming anyways if you want a realistic amount of motion blur, so it works out pretty neatly. Another method I use if I really don't want this artifact in my shot is to simply wait for it to scroll out of frame. I'll start recording and hold on the shot until it passes, sometimes for upwards of a minute or two, which is really inefficient, but it's the best and most consistent way I've found so far of getting a nice clean shot. It's usually not worth spending 2 or 3 minutes on a shot though, especially when I have like 100 to get to for every video. So more often than not, I'll just let it be. As long as it's not distracting from the point of the shot, I think it can actually look kinda cool. Same goes for another artifact that comes with filming screens, and that's moire patterns. These happen when the pattern of pixels on the screen and the pattern of little photosensors in your camera overlap. This usually isn't a problem with CRT screens because the resolution is so low and I blur the pixels anyways, so even when it does appear, it's unlikely to overwhelm the image. But when I film an HD screen, it's bound to happen and be very noticeable. And again, I'm usually fine with it just being there. I think embracing imperfection is the way to go when you're just trying to get stuff done, and there's something charming about how the camera imprints evidence on the image of its involvement in the process. For what I'm doing here, it works, you know? I like messing with my camera and making it produce images that you couldn't get with a naked eye, so some unexpected artifacts or abstractions are okay with me. If the image is readable and it looks alright, then it's no big deal. And that's basically the main chunk of advice I can give for people starting out filming CRT displays. I hope the segment was helpful to somebody. There's more stuff I consider for each of my shots, like the angle and the depth of field and the focal length, which just means the type of lens I use for each shot, but that knowledge comes from years of studying film and falls out of the scope of this video. After this quick break, we'll move on to the why. So, yeah, if you don't know who I am, my name is Harrison, aka Harold, and for over a year I've been making video essays about visual art, mostly video games so far, and for pretty much all of that time I've held myself to the artistic commandment that every piece of footage shown in my videos must travel through my camera's lens. That means I spend a lot of time filming my screens rather than using digital screen caps as footage, which is the norm. The CRT is currently my favorite type of display to film. It has an appeal that I imagine is obvious to you if you decide to click on this video. It's a type of display that hasn't been in mass production for over a decade, so it's novel and nostalgic to see it again. It's also widely considered to be the best type of screen you can use to experience retro media. There's a growing movement online of people parading CRT pixels, especially as they relate to the presentation of old video games. I think it went pretty viral on Twitter and TikTok a couple months ago. Basically, the argument is that old games were made to be seen on CRT displays, where pixels can be fuzzy and vague to the point where the light they produce tends to bleed together. There's a lot of cases where the artists working on these games ingeniously use those unique properties of CRT pixels to produce images that look higher quality than they actually technically are, and when you view these games on modern displays, you get an inferior picture. A popular example of this is the waterfall from Sonic the Hedgehog. Here it is when viewed on an HD screen. Not bad if you ask me, looks pretty good, but here it is on a CRT screen. Wow, it becomes more than just vertical strips of pixels imposed over a background, the two become one. The pixels blend together to give the illusion that the water layer is translucent, and if you pay attention to the landscape in the background, you can actually see it warping as though the light emitting from it is refracting through the water. It's amazing how much of a downgrade the HD screen is in comparison to the CRT. And there are plenty more examples where old games, especially ones from the 16-bit era, use the quirks of a CRT display to transcend their own limitations. However, there are many such cases where they simply don't. Other 16-bit games like Earthbound ain't fooling nobody. Basically any 8-bit game, as far as I've seen, ain't fooling nobody. Early 3D games, I think they look cool, and things like text and heads-up displays usually look better, but these polygons ain't fooling nobody. So while I agree that this concept of CRT pixel bleeding stands on solid ground, it's not the overarching reason why I find CRT screens appealing. The real reason why I prefer playing retro games and viewing other retro media on CRTs is because that is simply their proper context. When you look at an old game on an HD screen, you're placing it alongside modern works that were meant for that display, and in comparison, the old games tend to look jagged and lifeless and crusty, especially the early 3D stuff. They look downright crude next to newer games, which are usually more crisp, detailed, and animated. But when you put a retro work back on its native display, its appeal returns. Those CRT pixels not only enhance the art on some assets, they also universally soften the image. A lot of those jagged edges are sanded down. Since things are being viewed in their native resolution, the crust is washed away, and things like user interfaces, which tend to look unnecessarily large in HD, now look necessarily large on the CRT, especially the text. On top of this, I think the fuzzy statickiness of the screen injects the picture with a sense of life and energy that isn't there when the game is seen on a modern display. But even looking past these tangible benefits, I think the best part about putting these works in their proper context is that they cease to look old, at least to me. I was born after most of these games were released, but when I view them in their proper context, especially after a lifetime of rarely seeing them in said context, I understand why people could have seen them at one point as cutting edge. I can feel myself slipping into character, empathizing with the viewpoint of someone from a different period of time. As a person who spends a lot of time critiquing games and other forms of visual art, this is a useful lens to have because it helps me judge these games more on their own terms and remove myself at least a little bit from the lens of someone with decades of hindsight. This might go without saying, but all of these things apply to modern games as well, but in reverse. I don't usually like playing new stuff on retro screens because that's not the proper context either, even if it's retro style. It can be fun to mess around and see what new stuff looks like on an old display, but if I'm going to take a serious critical look at something, I'm going to try and do so in its proper context. I just can't read the words on screen. It's too fucking small. Looks like a after a game over in Slender. Now is the part of the video where I get self-indulgent and discuss my decision to film the screen for every single one of my videos. If you don't know, I do this whether I'm capturing a CRT or an HD screen or even a projector on occasion. If you just came to learn about CRTs and you don't know or care who I am, then the video is over. You can click away. No hard feelings. It's not just because I like CRT pixels. That is definitely why it's my favorite type of display to film, but the point isn't necessarily to adapt that display for modern viewing or something like that. I actually started out filming HD screens, and I'd say I still film them about as much as I film CRTs, which would be a redundant thing to do if that were my reasoning. You're most likely watching this video on a very similar display, so there's nothing to adapt. The true inspiration for my style is early YouTube Let's Play type videos. Back then, screen capture software and capture cards weren't widely used. Instead, people simply set up camcorders and filmed their screens. And I get why this method eventually phased out, because when the average person seeks footage of a game, they usually just want the game, hopefully in the best possible quality. They don't want this footage that's weirdly exposed and probably dumpster quality. They want to get as close as possible to the feeling of vicariously playing the game themselves. This goes double for people who search YouTube for movies and TV shows that they don't quite feel like paying for. That's all fine and good, but something is lost with the switch to the screen capping method. Whether they knew it or not, those old camcord-toting YouTubers weren't just capturing the game or even the screen it was playing on, they were also inadvertently capturing, to some extent, the room it was playing in the time it was filmed. They unwittingly engaged in an act of documentary, blurring the line between a gaming video and a vlog. And that's a big part of why I do it, because I like the idea of my videos having a more concrete sense of space, documenting not just my thoughts on art, but also the setting I was in while having those thoughts. I hope it makes me feel a little less like a disembodied voice talking over subpar gameplay, and more like a little man in his little room making a little video about a little game, which is the case. But even above that, my final reason for using a camera rather than screen cap software is that it gives my videos a heightened sense of subjectivity. With every camera setup and angle and lighting decision that I make, you get a more intimate sense of what a given work looks like through my eyes. So the subjectivity of the things I'm saying is further driven home by the enhanced subjectivity of the things I'm showing. Maybe not an appealing choice of style when you're trying to provide a more objective experience of a piece of art, but for a written opinion piece like the ones I make, the style and genre line up very neatly. So there you go. That's my spiel. I appreciate you for listening to what I have to say, especially if I'm a complete stranger to you. I hope you learned something or enjoyed yourself on some level, and I hope this makes it even easier for people to criticize my works in the future now that I've spelled out exactly what I'm going for. This video is dedicated to my boy SpongeBob. Bless up, SpongeBob.
I put all this lotion on my hands. Now I'm stuck in the bathroom. Alone. Because I can't turn the knob.